Thank you so much for being on our Females in Leadership panel. This was a panel that I was super passionate about implementing into our program, just because I just think the design world is just one of those breakout industries where you see a mixture of genders and you see mixtures of backgrounds, but having somebody of particular background in leadership can be a really eye-opening experience. And also, I think it's one of those industries where like lots of women are entering and like looking up to leaders like you. And so this panel is definitely something I wanted to do. So thank you again for coming. I will quickly introduce myself, and then I suppose I should let you guys introduce yourselves in your own words. So my name is Alyssa. I am the director of this year's conference. I'm also interested in a career in design and in media and being a creative post-graduation. And I'm currently a junior at Princeton University. I know, Elisa, you're an alum at Princeton, so go Tigers, I suppose. And yeah, this is the 4th annual design conference, and I'm so grateful to have been selected to be director. And that is essentially my, pride and glory of this year, was being the leader of this conference. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Deborah, if you'd like to start us off with your introduction.
Sure. So currently I'm independently consulting, mostly innovation and transformation projects. But I spent the last probably last 10 to 15 years of my career alternating between doing this sort of work and then going and building organizations and businesses from the ground up. Those businesses have varied, but have been always strongly rooted in purpose and impact. So this is it's been everything from building a new School of Art, Design, and Media in Singapore, with the first professional degree program in the region, to a fashion and design accelerator here in Brooklyn, where I'm coming to you from, that serve design-based businesses grow with sustainability and ethics really at the forefront. And then most recently, I was at WeWork, working with what I'll say the other co-founder, the one that you probably haven't heard as much about in the news, and the former chief people officer, to build what we were calling the CultureOS business. So it's really serving large organization executives and understanding and evolving their cultures.
I guess we should go in the order, maybe Brooke, then Annie, then Elisa.
I'm Brooke Hopper. I am the lead designer for drawing and painting at Adobe. Most recently, I've been working on Adobe Fresco, which is a dedicated drawing and painting app. We released on iPad last June, so almost a year ago. And then we've been expanding to other platforms as well. I do a lot of sort of evangelism for drawing and painting through Adobe. I do a lot of speaking. I also call myself a recovering graphic designer. Graphic design is where I have my roots. And even though at this point I'm doing a lot of leadership and mentoring, I still have a huge passion for graphic design. So I do a lot of that stuff on the side whenever I get the chance. Yeah, so that's me.
Annie, if you want to go.
Hi, my name is Annie Chang Rosen. I am based in Brooklyn as well with a design background. I'm currently at my parents' house in Massachusetts. I work at VICE Media Group. VICE started as a punk magazine in 1994 in Montreal and has grown to become the largest independent youth media company in the world. It's a group of brands that includes a news division, so Vice News, a TV network, an ad agency, a film studio. We have digital and editorial content across fashion, food, tech, music, with offices, 33 offices around the world. And I am the creative director there, so I am responsible for the creative and art direction and design of the VICE and VICE Media Group brand, overseeing design and animation for our TV network, creating marketing campaigns and global initiatives, and working with a super talented team of designers, animators, editors, writers, and creatives.
And Elisa, if you'd like to go.
I'm thrilled to be here. Elisa Jagerson, yes, alumni from a long time ago, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. Career began right out of school in sort of justice and legal reform, working in Capitol Hill and working in affordable housing and whatnot around sort of poverty issues, and then we're working in international development, moved into Latin Africa and Latin America. And then just sort of, I'll probably talk about this again, but but just really kind of drank the Kool-Aid on business when I ended up in a private equity firm and converted over to the dark side, and ended up running a design innovation and design firm for about 10 years called Speck Design here in Silicon Valley, and became completely obsessed with this idea of how do you make the design process more reliable so that I can eventually full circle the whole thing and get back to developing countries and take our innovation process in a way, back to those markets where there's a lot less money to spend. You can have a lot fewer false starts. You can have lots of false starts, but not expensive ones. And so I'm wildly passionate about that at this point.
So great to hear from all the different backgrounds that you guys are from. And I feel like, on the behalf of Business Today and the whole Design Nation conference, we feel super lucky to have all of you. Let's move on to our first question for the panel. So this is more about the challenges of being a woman. Most of those questions are overdone. What is it like to be a woman in so-and-so industry? So instead, could you each elaborate about a time when your background or identity influenced positive or negatively your work or your career? Maybe if we could start with Deborah.
Sure. I guess to couch that, I'll just tell you a little bit about my background first. I'll keep it short, but I grew up in a town of about 280 people in rural Minnesota, so mostly working class. Nobody I knew was in the design field or even really knew that was a viable option for a career. So I kind of fell into design because I loved physically building things out in the garage with my hands, and I was really good at math and science. So not the typical kind of probably path in, although a lot of us come from engineering as well. So I actually ended up going to school for architecture. I ended up going to a great school in the Midwest that had a lot of students who were East Coast elite and who had gone to private boarding schools and had highly connected families and came from a world that's just completely foreign to the one that I grew up in. So for me, it was a really eye-opening experience. It made me realize just how much in the world I don't know that I don't know yet. And so I think that's kind of what served me. So a specific example, fast forward a few years from when I graduated, I was 29 years old. I had just finished grad school in graphic design as well. And the opportunity to teach in a brand new school of art, design, and media in Singapore kind of fell in my lap. So I arrived thinking I'm going to be an assistant professor and I'm going to get to learn from all these amazing people from around the world. And while all that was true, it turned out that they had paid me to be the chair of a brand new visual communication program in undergraduate. I didn't go to undergrad for visual communications. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what that looks like in that context, right? In Singapore, that is where there is a nascent at the time, a nascent creative economy growing. This is part of a national economic scheme. So all that was just a lot of unknowns for me. And now I'm in charge of building everything from the curriculum to the studios to the team. So I'm going to top it off again, right? I'm in this completely other context. But I think essentially using that sort of resourcefulness from where I grew up, this sort of curiosity for knowing there's so much I don't know. And I've also grown a lot of empathy for others' point of view and context. So, built the team as soon as I could to be able to have more collaborators on this, a really diverse team at that, to have a lot of different points of view to be brought into that. We studied the best degree programs in, yes, the US and yes, Europe, but also East Asia. Understand how those are different. Reached out to the local design community, and again, it was very nascent at the time, but just trying to understand what might that future industry look like in that particular context, and then just really, I think, using that to there were just so many different learning and communication styles from what I was used to, so we had to really figure that out in terms of even teaching, and as a first-time professor. And there are also hierarchical structures at the university that made it really challenging, especially being a young woman in a leadership position. But at the same time, I also there were certain things I recognized that I was able to use to mine and my colleagues and students' advantage, which were some of the privileges I had as being white and American. So I could speak up in ways that others couldn't. And so I was able to use that to sort of support and bolster my colleagues and my students. But just we really collaboratively built that with that team. I was able to bring together with the students. We had constant feedback loops there, and collaborative kind of built, learned, and evolved it as we went to become a really solid and still really well-regarded program.
That's awesome. Maybe Brooke, would you like to follow up on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And also kind of piggybacking on what Deborah said, I also grew up in a super tiny town in the middle of Kansas. So I also had no idea what graphic design was. I'd never heard of the term, but I was really lucky because my aunt was an interior decorator and my dad was a food scientist. And so they were in these sort of like, for that area, very obscure industries. And thankfully for my father actually traveled a lot. My mom didn't like to travel at all. And so during the summers, my dad would take us with him because it was the late 80s, early 90s. And at that point, money was just like flowing everywhere. And so you could always take a partner with you. And so my mom didn't like to travel, so he would take us. So I had this opportunity to meet all of these come to find out later, like really high standing people in the food science industry. And so I got to understand that. And a lot of what my dad taught me is that like, people are people. Like everyone wants to be liked. Everyone wants to be appreciated. And so I learned that from him. And then so also fast forward to undergrad, I decided that even though I really loved art, it didn't make any money. And so I was going to go to school for finance. So I went to school for finance for a couple of years and realized that even though I could definitely make a viable career in finance, I would not be very happy. And so as I was trying to decide what I was going to switch to, I had a friend who said, you know, there's this degree that I've heard of. It's computers and it's art. And I know that you're good at both of those things. It's called graphic design. Try it out. And I didn't even research what it was. I just signed up for it. And I've been so glad that I did that. But what that gave me is that gave me the benefit of actually I went on to get a business minor, but that gave me sort of this leg up that I didn't realize. I came to realize later that I was able to understand business, the business side of design, as well as the design side. And that's actually served me really well. And so fast forward to my first job. One of the things I meant to say is growing up, I also was the only female in a group of like 7 or 8 male cousins. And they just treated me as one of them. My first job out of undergrad was at a web design firm, and I was the only female there. And what's interesting about that is I didn't think anything about it because growing up, I had been surrounded by all males. And so I just kind of took it as it was. And I think going out about that, there's a few things. One of them is that the not knowing about how things were supposed to be or how I was supposed to maybe be uncomfortable in a company of where I was the only female. I wasn't. I was kind of blind to that, and I'm really glad for that. And the second one is realizing the value of understanding the business side of design, along with also understanding design, because I think that put me in a very good position to realize both sides of things and make decisions when it came to my professional work, what was good for the client, what was good for the business, but also what was good for design, and bring those two things together. And apologize for all the noise. As I mentioned before, my husband's actually graduating from his MBA program and they're cheering right now.
No worries at all. That was great. Thank you. Maybe Annie, would you like to touch on that?
Sure. Congratulations to your husband, by the way. That's amazing. I missed that. So I have a story about a project that I worked on. So after the 2016 election, like many women across the country, I felt helpless. And the Women's March was coming up, and it brought this sense of collected hope that I was impassioned to be involved with. And I wanted my company to be involved with it as well. And so I was part of a team to sort of figure out how can we go there, but not as a brand, but just go as humans, standing with other humans, you know, sticking up for something that we all believed in. And instead of making it about the president, I wanted to get straight to the heart of where my outrage stemmed from. And just that personal experience, I think, was really incredible to be able to put into the project. And we came up with a simple typographic solution for the campaign. So it was simply just crossing out the words racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia and transphobia. And we went to the march and just had conversations with women. We came with blank protest signs and pre-stamped postcards addressed to the White House, and just allowed women and the march goers to be heard, not just collectively, but as individuals. And we filmed the whole activation, and it ended up being awarded a Webby and an Emmy. And I truly believe that my and my team's own experience and sentiments after the election are really what made the activation so powerful and impactful.
That's great. Thank you to hear. And then lastly, you can go to Elisa.
I'm kind of glad I'm going last just because all of your stories are so positive and inspired. I actually don't mind. I get that this question is a bit of a turn off, the whole, how has it been hard to be a woman? But I'm kind of coming from the side where I think it's actually still under discussed, and creates permission for other women to say, yeah, actually, this is something I'm up against. So I love this question. And I'm of the age where, you know, right there with, I was, with, you know, I've been sexually assaulted, I've been sexually harassed, I've been fired because I was pregnant, I've been, like, name it, and anybody of my age has been through it. Everybody, every single woman I know, certainly. And I've been CEO since I was 28. So this was of a company. So for 20 years, I've been running everything I've been involved with, but it didn't seem to matter. I've sat down at a dinner with an investor and had him say, I'll give you money, and stick a tongue down my throat, like all those things. And I've been the only woman in every room. And I went to a conference once where I was one woman in 10,000 people. It was I had started a software company in the heavy transportation industry. So it's just, I think it's and I think there's legacy for that. So being, so I'm not a designer, I'm a business person, and I ran a design firm. And coming at it, I think there's a time for so I'll just say that has it served me in some ways? Yes, but I guess the high level is, for many, many years I was sort of asleep to the gender issue. At Princeton, I actually studied race issues, African American studies. I was fascinated based on some stuff from my background that sort of in race dynamics, and I was completely asleep to the fact that there were gender dynamics until, so through all of that all of those experiences I just named, no idea there was a gender dynamic, no idea I was anything other than a woman that should just be learning how to play by men's rules. All the rules were male and came from a masculine society. And even as recently as, you know, when some of that science came out about how women speak and how we finish our sentences in an upturn and how we really have to learn not to do that. And just a few years ago, I sort of woke up. I had a moment of, oh my God, this has been crazy, actually. There's like a Twilight Zone-y feeling around having been a woman in all these environments, having really never been aware of the fact that I was a woman, or that I was trying to optimize for a paradigm and live in a world that really wasn't designed by me or for me. So, and in that context, I sort of had this epiphany, and now I look at it like, wait, why do I have to not finish my statement in an upturn? Because I might actually, asking a question is fundamental to who I am and to some of my gifts. So why don't you all learn how to finish a sentence with an upturn? Like, I'm sort of shifting the whole thing, and now I'm pissed off. My daughter just got me a pillow that says, well, the patriarchy isn't going to fuck itself. And I'm like, you know, I think I'm, so I've got pissed off daughters. So I'm sort of entering a new stage of life, having so much fun with calling it out whenever I see it. It's been very liberating and very new.
That was awesome. I feel like that's a great kind of like wrap up to the whole discussion about, you know, how personal backgrounds really affect how we see things. So leading it into the next question, how has your personal experiences and like your personal background that you touched upon informed your leadership, or how has it informed how you interact with your industry, with your coworkers, and with your world? Oh, sorry. I feel like we should reverse the order. So, Elisa, if you want to talk again after you just spoke, that'd be great. Oh, I think you're on mute really quick.
Sorry, say the question again, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure. So how is your personal background or your experiences that you just mentioned, how has that informed your leadership, and how has it and changed or influenced the way that you interact with your industry or with your coworkers and with your world?
So I shared a little bit about sort of the new energy I have around it, and it's gotten me really curious about the gifts that women bring to the innovation process, to design, and in particular the user insights. So when I joined as CEO of Speck Design, sort of a 10-person design firm, grew it to about a 50-person design firm, and we through the process I bought a user insights firm. We sort of expanded our definition of engineering into software and digital and whatnot. And in that process, and getting to know the user insights world, we were sort of a heavy engineering firm, and we started to invent a bunch of products that where we were sort of solving the problem, but the problem hadn't been correctly identified in the first place. So we were sort of starting to really want to make sure that every single time we answered a question, it was the right question. And getting to this user insights world, I found my people. I found, and it's predominantly women, and it was these people who could go in and in short order, having no expertise in a space, go in and deeply understand a market, find the white space, understand the emotional drivers for users. And I'd majored in anthropology and African American studies, so it was somewhat familiar. But and I got very curious into why the industry was dominated by women, and what it is about our ability to, is it intuition? So how has it shaped me? I'm now writing a book on this topic of knowing this. Is it intuition? Is it sort of a gut knowing? What's behind it? How do you get more of it? And trying to ever, in this constant quest to make the design and innovation process ever more reliable, I've gotten very interested in sort of the gifts that women have. So it's a long and circuitous route to how that life experience has shaped what's interesting to me now.
Very awesome. I'm sure as soon as your book comes out, you can expect orders from the whole DN team, or at least from me. So next, I feel like we could move in that order reverse. So Annie, if you'd like to go.
Sure. So I started my career as an unpaid intern, both at Vice and a whole bunch of other companies. And I learned really quickly that there's a whole range of ways that people will treat you, especially if you're at the bottom of the barrel. So there are some people that are going to completely ignore you, not take you seriously, dismiss you. And then there are a few people that are going to encourage you and listen to you. And those people have such a profound impact. My first boss has mentored me for over 10 years, and honestly, without him, I think I'd be in a totally different place. And I think there's a saying that you don't always remember what people say to you, but you remember how they make you feel. And so I just wanted to make sure that when I was able to grow in my career, I was able to create a safe, inclusive, and collaborative work environment and allow the people around me to feel valued and heard. And I feel like that really came from my own experience. And, you know, it's something that I think everyone can relate to.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you. And then we can go to Brooke and then Deborah after.
Right. Yeah. So I have actually had the opportunity to work under two different types of managers / creative directors. The first one is the type of manager or creative director who holds all of their cards to their chest. They are the one that has all the knowledge. They know everything. And then you will do stuff and then they will take credit for it. I've also had the opportunity to work with creative directors who are there, they want to teach you, they want you to learn everything that they know, they're willing to delegate. And I've learned the most about mentoring and being a leader from those two different types of experiences. Ironically, they happened one right after the other. And it made me realize the type of leader that I want to be. You know, I want to be the type of person who, you know, even though I may know exactly how to do something or exactly how a problem needs to be solved, I'm going to give it to someone else and I'm going to let them learn and I'm going to guide them through that and let them, make mistakes and understand the stuff that I needed to go through in order to understand as well. And so I think that's been one of the biggest things that I've taken away from my past experience about how to lead, how to be a mentor, how to delegate, and really allowing the people around me, even though it may take me 5 minutes to solve a problem or to communicate how something needs to be solved or how it needs to be handled, it's better to let others around me learn that for themselves. And then in turn, they have the opportunity to take that experience away and do the same to other designers. And so I think, for me, it's really important to take that, for lack of a better term, torch, and pass it along to allow other people, because when you can be a mentor, it's important to be mentored, and it's important to be a mentor. And I think that's I think that's really integral to being a good designer, is just learning how to do both of those things in a good way.
My answer is probably fairly similar to Brooke's. I'm oriented slightly differently, but what I've learned, I think I was saying this previously, is I know I'm not the expert, and I also know that collectively we're smarter. So the only assumption I bring is that I have a lot to learn, and I want to grow in it, and I want to grow. But I also want you to as well, right? I want to try to surround myself with people who have a diversity of thought, experiences, and backgrounds. I find, especially in the design field, it tends to be a lot of people who come from privilege. And so I want to make sure that there's other voices that are heard and can bring into the conversation, because our product, whatever that product looks like, is going to be so much better. So I have very high standards, probably more for myself almost than anyone else. But I also, with others, because I think what Brooke was saying, those two types of leadership styles, in that I will always try to be more of a servant leader, in terms of starting with trust and giving you autonomy. If something messes up, I think one of my team members, a big accelerator, said, she was like, you call me out on any time, whenever something goes wrong, but you always figure out, how are we going to do this, right? It's not on her, it's we are as a team. And I think that's just, again, kind of coming from that way of knowing that I don't have all the answers either. I'm actually rarely the subject matter expert. I'm usually much more the kind of galvanizer, catalyst. I can make sense out of things, move things forward. But so I will always start with trust and give you autonomy, and encourage you to find and use, I should say, your voice, because I think that often happens with a lot of women. Will step back in a room sometimes, and not just women, anyone who's not kind of a particular, anyone who's just has a different style of engaging. But I want you to be your best self, because that's going to make all of us collectively better.
That was great. Thank you so much for those responses. I think, all of your different responses are both connected but distinct in each way. And I think those were all super helpful. For the next question, I'd love to learn about how being in a leadership position or multiple positions have challenged you. And then what are things that you've taken away from those challenges? So maybe Brooke, if you'd like to start us off this time.
Yeah, sure. And I'm actually just going to add on to a little bit of what I said before. I think one of the easiest things to do as a leader, you're in a leadership position because you have experience, you have knowledge, there's a lot that you've put into it. And so as a leader, I think it can be easy because you know the answer, but that's not, if you do all the things, you're not a leader, you're a doer. And I think being in a leadership position, one of the biggest challenges for me really is to always remind myself that I'm here to help others also become leaders, to help others grow. And yeah, I think that's one of the biggest, it's one of the biggest challenges, but at the same time, it's also one of the biggest rewards. When you can help, as Deborah mentioned, when you can put your trust in someone and you can help guide that person and be there for them when they have questions, and to see them achieve, that person's achieve the things that they're looking to achieve and to solve the problem in their way, is one of the most rewarding things that I've experienced.
Great, thank you. Maybe we could go to Elisa now.
Yeah, so my leadership style turned on its head when I met the design industry. Before that, there were I've worked for a good stint in private equity and leverage, and ran a microcap leverage buyout fund. And when you'd go in, you'd buy a company. I'd be interim CEO for maybe 6 months while I found a new CEO. And it was a pretty finite set of tools you'd use. Certainly empowerment was one of them. And but in terms of how to turn a company around or get it on a growth trajectory, there were only so many dials. And then I was brought in to run this design firm. I'd never heard of design. They sat me down and they said, well, we spun out of IDEO. And I looked at them and I said, I can tell by the fact that you've paused that I'm supposed to know who IDEO is. But, so that was the beginning of my introduction to the design industry. And I fell in love. I was blown away. I didn't know that, I'd never really actually thought about the fact that anything I touched had been designed. And it was at that point in my career, I essentially believed that there were the good people in the world. There were these sort of passionate, high integrity people who were building companies in the middle of nowhere that I was buying, and they were solid, but maybe not as sophisticated or hadn't benefited from the opportunities that we in Silicon Valley had. And then there were these sort of geniuses in the world of VC and software and whatnot that were just mostly assholes, but really successful. And I felt like I had to choose. I got to work with smart people or good people. And I met the design world, and everybody in design had been the smartest in class since kindergarten, but they were passion driven, high integrity. It was just mind blowing to find the world. So it changed the way I led. Instead of leading with the same old tools, it was a lot about, I felt like in order to connect and really move people towards a certain North Star, I had to walk in and sort of pry open my chest and put my heart on the table every single day. I had to deeply feel it. And it was a very high standard. It's the best leading I've ever done, and the worst, as I learned. So I would say that at this point, and what's shifted over the years is at this point, I no longer want to lead. I am so dying to follow. I'd like to learn. I'd like to, there's something about becoming a leader really young, which is that every single thing you learn, you don't have anybody to teach you. Maybe you have a board, but and maybe some investors, but for the most part, you're kind of learning by touching a hot stove. And at this point, I am ready to, my hands really, really burned. I learned a lot as an entrepreneur, started a bunch of companies, ran a bunch of companies, but I am so excited. When I sold my company Speck Design to a big public company called Future Brand, IPG, they said, oh my God, you've been on your own for so long. How will you ever possibly work for somebody else? And I kept thinking, oh, you have no idea. I am dying to work for somebody else. I'm dying to I want to work for somebody like Brooke or Deborah or Annie, who are empowering and kind and warm and wise and take me with them and actually teach me things. But I'm looking less for taking on that responsibility, and I'm looking more for getting to be the sponge that learns.
That was great. Thank you. Annie, would you like to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that I've learned and is important to me, and something that I never thought about when I started out my career, is the idea of hiring people and kind of having that power to build a team. And something that I've learned is that, you know, maybe you're not hiring people for their portfolio or their resume or because they're a friend of a friend, but what they stand for. And a quick example of that is I was working on a photo shoot for a show about female sexuality called Slut Ever. And we knew we wanted to hire a woman photographer, but we wanted to figure out who the right person would be. And we found this amazing photographer. Her name is Ashley Armitage. And I believe she was starting out, and she's gone on to do huge things. But her work shows real women with imperfections and celebrates female sexuality naturally and diversely. And she on her own is a champion for women. And that's really who I thought would be perfect for the shoot. And due to the shared values on set, the host of the show and Ashley, the photographer, clicked immediately. And really what happened was magical. So, you know, another part of the puzzle that is really important.
Fantastic, thank you. And then lastly, Deborah, if you'd like to comment.
Sure. Echoing Elisa, I think I've been leading organizations for so many years that actually when I went to WeWork a few years ago, I was really specifically excited to be, I was kind of wondering if I was going to tap out on being able to like have like a mentor essentially. And I've also been in so many different contexts and different, everything from like, or just so many different fields and industries, again, that like I always come in with just like, I often joke with people, I'm kind of like, my job's often to come in and like grab someone's hand to help them jump off a cliff while I'm on a steep learning curve, right? So it's like, it's always like that. But so I learn by doing, right? And so I very rarely have had that kind of mentor relationship. And the former chief people officer at WeWork and I became partners we worked on there, and he is a longtime corporate executive who is just an incredible human. And so it was really great because I was able to work with him. What I realized though is because I've been kind of leading organizations, I wasn't used to large organization dynamics. And I've always demonstrated just by doing, right? Like, I mean, I will share the work of what I'm really proud the team is doing and things like that, but hadn't had to advocate for myself as much. So I think that was something I probably, one of, in this last position, at least in a key leadership position, but having to realize there's a whole new skill set that I didn't have for that context, which is having to kind of advocate for myself, having to be very clear in what, in other parts of the organization and finding like, who are those other advocates or who are the decision makers, and just really getting a sense for that. And the other side of that, I think, was realizing that my strength of assuming that I don't know, like I was saying before, really became a weakness in certain ways too, because of that, right? Because my instincts in retrospect were spot on a lot of things. And I had the opportunity to have the ear to talk to people about them. And I only did in certain ways. I did it more in like a coaching, advising way, even the leadership style I was just talking about, versus being more heavy-handed about like being very clear and about this is what is happening. I was trying to help other people get to that point of understanding, and it didn't always happen. That's just a quick little side story of that. The person I worked with at my kind of partner at WeWork, like I said, was incredible. But even he, as an incredible of a person, when it came to things like I would become his almost coach in certain ways because, he's like 20 years my senior, especially around things like how women are treated. So he himself is incredible, but he would have a hard time responding to, for example, there was a very high power real estate executive, I'll just say, in the New York area that he knew quite well and would come in, but he would say things about the women that worked at WeWork, for example, at corporate headquarters, about, oh, it's young and pretty and like things like this. And JRD, who I worked with, didn't know how to respond to those sort of things. And so just also be realizing where your experience, and like I said, for any kind of, this comes across in such a diversity of ways, can be of help. Speak up and share that and help educate other people as well, to be able to see things in a different way. So I was able to give him tools of ways to have that conversation that, that would still, just because from my own experience of how I wouldn't have tolerated that. If I had been in that conversation, that guy and I would have had a conversation, right? So help others that are really well intentioned as well to be able to learn from our experiences.
Those are great insights. Thank you so much. I think we should move to the last question just so we can get to student questions. So this year's theme is the impact, which focuses on how design can be both socially impactful and mindful, but also how design can be created with a purpose. I think the purpose is really what drives a lot of design. And so what does design with an impact mean to you, and how do you design with an impact? I think just to shake up the order again, maybe Annie, if you'd like to go first this time.
Yes, for sure. I think design is a superpower, and it's really up to us to decide how we're going to use that power. The best design advocates something that you are passionate about. One project that comes to mind that I worked on was a voting initiative, and with all the noise, we were able to create something really quiet, and we ended up driving nearly 18,000 new voter registrations, and help in the midterm elections, and help contribute to the largest voter turnout since 1914, which was amazing. But I think that every person has their own very unique experiences and taste and aesthetic. And I really encourage everyone to create their personal style and not wait for an opportunity to come to them, but really try to create your own opportunities and your own style. You are able to create something that nobody else can. And for a long time, I used to try to rely on my job to creatively satisfy me, and it's never going to happen. You always need to be creating your own projects where no one else is involved, that represents you and what you are passionate about.
Great, thank you. Second, if we could have Deborah, and then after that, Elisa.
Sure. I'm going to keep this short because I've spent so much time in kind of impact and purpose space, but I could talk forever on it. So I will just say, in terms of how I define that, is it means understanding that every choice you're making has consequences and lives within a greater ecosystem. So really understanding, like, if you make a choice over here that it's having a ripple effect over here, that $5 t-shirt, you might not be paying for, but someone paid for it, for example, right? So just really being cognizant of whether you're designing something that's tangible, like a product, or something that's ephemeral, like an experience or a service or a culture. Those are, get as smart as you can about what that looks like, and what the kind of the bigger ecosystem that's in, the longer journey that exists within as well.
I love Annie's idea of design being a superpower. Might be my new favorite term, because that's exactly how I think about it. The design process is sort of the foundation to the innovation process, and innovation is what every company, every country, every family, it's what everybody needs. If you define it, depending on how you define it, it's the most trite word in the world, but if it is change that creates value, if it doesn't create value, it's just change. And and every company names it as one of their top 5 goals and whatnot. We all want it. And in particular, there's places that have very scarce resources that really need it. They need change that creates value. And it's really people trained in the business of design and the creative act of design that know how to do it. So to really think about yourself as having a superpower and being able to go out and move big dials in the world, all the changes that need to happen, I think it will come from that process, the process that you are all learning and understand. So that's with great power comes great responsibility. So that's just wildly exciting.
Great, and then Brooke, if you could go last.
Sure, yeah. I think one of the biggest ways that design can have impact, and I'm going to speak about this through the standpoint of what I do, which is making software for the most creative people in the world. And I think historically, we've thought of like creativity and software belongs to those people who actually have hands to touch a keyboard, who have eyes that can see the computer screen, who have ears that can hear sound. And I think one of the biggest ways that we can have impact is allowing creativity to be accessible to everyone. And that in turn allows everyone to have an impact. And so I think I'm also going to keep this short, is just legitimately allowing everyone to have an impact, and allowing everyone to be able to create in some way, shape, or form, and in the way that speaks to them. To jump onto Annie's comment about design being a superpower and designing something that comes from you, I think that's one of the places where I can have the most impact, right? Is allowing others to have an impact by allowing creativity to happen, regardless of whatever your circumstances.
Thank you so much for all of your amazing answers to all the questions. I do want to address all of the student questions that have been submitted. There are tons of votes on them, so I think everyone's itching to hear the answers. So for these ones, I'm just going to ask that you guys popcorn in. So some people might not want to comment, some might want to, so I'll just present the question. This one is from Shruti Rajagopalan. Did you find mentors in the industry throughout your journey? And if so, how did you find them, and what kinds of things did you learn?
I'll throw one out, which is you can stalk them, which I highly recommend. And also, the only other point I'd make about it is you can find them in the most surprising place. And I think it was Deborah that was saying that they might be exactly the people that turn you off the most, that can teach you the most. So mentors come in all shapes and sizes, but just go after them. And if they don't remember and they don't respond, just go again.
To that point, if anyone wants to reach out, I would love to chat with every one of you. So please do reach out. And yeah, I think what you said is great, that, you know, you could find them at the workplace, you could find someone at a party, like they're everywhere. And it doesn't have to be somebody older than you or more experienced than you. You could find a mentor in a totally different, you know, different type of work. And every single person that you meet is going to influence you in some way. So really those relationships are really going to help you, I think.
The next question is from Anna Bodney. So as a woman soon to be entering the full-time workforce, what advice do you have during the interview process for vetting a company? And have you ever rejected a position due to company culture or sexism?
I would say, just in terms of vetting, I've always vetted during the interview process, to be completely honest. When I've had 2 periods of that I've been like actively searching for jobs. One was after I graduated from undergrad. The second was after I graduated from grad school, which I had much more of this sort of headspace of where I wanted either something in education or something in creativity. So I was only looking at companies that were focused on those 2 things. And for me, it's just been a process of like getting a sense of the room when you're in the interview process. And I think from my experience, it's been pretty easy to read the room to see how you're going to be treated by the people that are interviewing you. I think you can get an understanding of company culture pretty quickly based on my experience.
Show up as you. Like, don't try to be something that you're not or you couldn't be. Show up as the best version of you for sure. But if you're not, if the kind of connection isn't there, it's a relationship, just like any other relationship. And it has to, like, if you show up as someone you think you need to be, then you're gonna need, and you get the job, you're gonna need to show up as that person every day for the rest of the time, or it's gonna be very awkward. So just kind of finding that way to be that. And I think people sometimes are afraid to do that. Again, the best version of yourself. And it's up to you to tell your story, to do your homework, to be able to tell your story within the context of that organization. But be wary of trying to be something that you're not.
I agree with all of that. Is that I didn't know how little I needed to know at that when I was first going into work. I was worked very hard to sort of dazzle people with experience I'd had and in summers and whatnot. And I don't think I understood that they're looking at me as brand new. It doesn't matter. They're just reading my capacity and my personality. So to just remember that your effortfulness in trying to dazzle them will be important and well received, but it's not the actual content, it's the effort, because you haven't done anything yet in, relatively speaking to your career.
On to the next question from Tina Liu. What are ways you can suggest women or men can better advocate for other women in a workspace? And what are ways you've seen that we can be better allies to designers of color?
So just a high level thought that I think is important to get is that all the science is that innovation efforts, the design process is better when there is diversity of thought. There's just infinite number of books on the 9 faces of innovators and you need diversity of thought. And I would just make a very strong case that you cannot have diversity of thought without actual diversity. So just remember that. And if you are going to work on an innovation or a design team that does not have actual diversity, you cannot do good work.
I think I've said this a little bit before, but like if you're in the room where people aren't being able to express their voice, make sure that you create space for them. Ask them, right? Also, people like show up differently, so they're not going to necessarily take the whole space. If some people aren't, and sometimes those quiet thinkers are the best idea makers, right? So be that person who constantly is curious about what other people are thinking about their ideas, so that makes sure that they're able to surface and create space for them to do so.
So this next question is from Alyssa Shears. What is a passion project you're working on right now, just finished or hoping to start up? I know, Annie, you spoke about having passion projects, so maybe you might want to start this question off if you have an answer.
Sure. I mean, there's so many things. Like top level, I would like to develop a TV show or a film. I think I've spent much of my career supporting documentary content through graphics and photography and art direction, but I would love to actually drive the content itself. So that's big level. Super small level. I love flags, as you can see. And so I want to start designing my own flags just for myself. And actually, since we've all been working from home and living at home, I love mini things, like tiny little things. And so I ordered a bunch of clay and I'm just starting to make little things just for myself. So it's been awesome.
I'd love to hear from the rest of you, actually, just personally, out of curiosity, what passion projects you guys are pursuing currently.
Yeah, I'm happy to go. And actually, because all of the work that I do is digital, and I also create digital drawing and painting apps, a lot of what I do in my free time is actually working traditionally or with analog. Most recently, I've gotten into practicing INSO. And because I haven't been able to find like the correct brush or the correct paint, I'm just sort of like making my own. So like, I really am kind of bastardizing it in some ways, but just really the practice of the INSO was really understanding and contemplating sort of the simple circle. I think that's been a big part of just incorporating a lot of meditation and a lot of traditional and analog practices into my work has been a big focus of me lately.
Mine's not nearly as fun or creative as Brooke and Annie. For some reason, I have 2 degrees in design, and I've been opting much more towards kind of other areas. 2 things I'm working on right now. Again, these are going to be a little heavy and a little nerdy, but one, and Elisa would love to talk to you about this, is I've been kind of putting together the last couple of months, just really understanding the value of a design mindset and sustainability in the C-suite of an organization, and just really what that looks like, and having the language. We've seen it a lot, but it's usually from designers speaking designer speak. And it's not actually felt, being able to put in the position of really helping understand the, for a different audience. And I just feel like, especially what we're looking at right now in terms of like a really unknown future, those are exactly the skill sets that we need to have at the table. And that's not necessarily the only people at the table, but really like we also have the ability to facilitate and convene. To Annie's point, like we have a lot of superpowers that I think are really pertinent right now. And I just feel like that's it's what I've kind of been doing, leaning more towards and looking to do, and would love to like create more of a conversation around that. So doing some of that sort of stuff. And then again, not exciting in terms of creativity, but just feeling really, the other kind of pet project I'm doing right now is I'm actually training to be a crisis counselor for crisis text lines. So again, kind of heavy, but for me, it's an important thing. I'm learning through it. I'm learning other communication skills that will serve me in other ways, but more importantly, I've been looking for a more meaty kind of volunteer opportunity.
I've got a little cutting in and out, so just flag me if you can't hear me, but I have this addiction to going deeper and deeper into the root problem of something. I'll get very frustrated by pick a topic, climate change, whatnot. And I'll sort of, but what's underneath the fact that we keep making bad decisions, and what's underneath that? And so my current hypothesis is that what's underneath most broken things is the infrastructure of our democracy, gerrymandering, campaign finance reform, money in politics, these kinds of things. I'm working a lot on bipartisan democracy reform, and I'm working a lot on the legal infrastructure for women internationally. So there are certain countries where it's not, women can't inherit wealth, women can't pass along wealth, women can't own things, women can't drive. So I'm working a lot on that. And then tactically, I've got 3 kids, so I'm making them, we're packing beans, and we're doing lots of things related to COVID-19 that are, we're doing get out the vote stuff, and just tons of things that I can get the kids to help on. So I'm all cause all the time. And then of course, trying to make the world better by seeing if I can crack the code on making a reliable innovation system that's so reliable we can take it into emerging markets. So that would be my life's dream. So many fun projects to have, so little time.
For one of the final questions, if we have time, we might go to another one, but Derek Chow asks, what's something that you think young designers often overvalue? And for this, I'll open the floor to whomever has a comment.
I'll throw out that they overvalue themselves in terms of really learning how to work on a team and collaborating and being in learning mode. And, you know, so as I was suggesting before, people spend a lot of time sort of posturing and positioning themselves for being well perceived, and it's unnecessary. I also think they undervalue themselves and sometimes can overcompensate and end up sort of taking a backseat when their life experience or their intuition is exactly what a project or a team needs. So, so I basically said what I said, and then I said the opposite, but there you have it.
I would actually agree with you 100%. I have learned the most from some designers who have just come out of school, and they come in and they look at something and they say, well, why did you do it this way? And it makes me stop and I'm like, why did we do it this way? Well, we only did it this way for a business reason. It's not for the reason, you know, that, 5% of it was a business reason. The rest of it was actually like, it just doesn't fit. And so I would say that's one thing that is undervalued, to flip it on its head, is just being brave enough to ask really uncomfortable questions.
I think something that I learned since being in school is that you can't design in a vacuum. So I think my mindset in school was, if I do my projects really well and I get good grades and I learn all the programs, I'm going to be great. And it's really not true. To be a great designer, you need to watch a million movies, you need to read magazines, you need to look at album art, signage, travel. You really need to look at the world around you and build that visual database. And that, yeah, I feel like that's something I've learned over the past few years.
I think that in terms of overvalue, it's undervalued. I'm still learning these things in my career, realizing there are things I just take for granted that we just do that are actually extraordinarily valuable. But in terms of overvalue, I would say that I think sometimes we do overvalue design within the design industry specifically, as that it can solve all the problems and save the world. And I think there's a lot that we bring to the table that is really critical to that. But we cannot do it alone. We absolutely need partners to be able to do that in any effective way, especially when it comes to things like systems delivery or understanding the actual the financial models for that sort of thing. So find those partners and you'll be extraordinarily powerful and use that power for good.
Fantastic. We are a bit over time and I don't want to take up too much of your afternoons, so I think we will wrap it up there. Thank you so much on the behalf of everybody who is tuned into this webinar, everybody who is behind the Designation process. We want to thank you so much for being a part of this. I personally super enjoyed listening to all of you guys, and I probably will be emailing you shortly to ask for your mentorship. And you can probably expect lots of emails in your inbox from all the people watching this. It was so entertaining. It was so awesome to hear. And yeah, I just want to extend a huge thanks. And I hope you guys enjoyed speaking on this panel, and hopefully we can have you back for Designation in the future.